lecture series that happens on select Wednesday evenings at 6:30 at PNCA or our PNCA Zoom location. Join us Wednesday, February 17th for a talk by Leslie and Noel. So that is coming right on up. So it's a pleasure that I introduce Carol Francis Lung. She is an artist, soft power activist, and professor of fashion, fiber, and materials at California State University, Los Angeles. As the biographer and archivist for her alter ego, Frau Fiber, Carol curates and programs the Institute for Labor Generosity Workers and Uniforms. Frow Fiber's research center and working archive downtown San Pedro, California. Together, Carol and Frow Fiber activate a vocabulary of fashion and textile production and consumption, crafting one-of-a-kind garments, installations, performances, and social sculpture. The work has been exhibited internationally, even including here in Portland at the Museum of Contemporary Craft. Their CV includes numerous publications, and their objects are housed in multiple collections, including the Smithsonian Museum of the American Art Archive, excuse me. We are so excited to have you here, Carol, and those of us that have studio visits with you this week are so excited about it, myself included. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to you, Carol.
Super, thanks so much. It's really great to be here. I have to say, I feel a little rusty because I haven't given a public lecture for like a year. And yeah, it's jumping into this new Zoom lecture system as well, which is really interesting. So one of the things I just want to say is thank you all for having me. To utilize the chat to ask questions. Sarah's going to be monitoring it, and I told her to feel free to interrupt me while I'm talking to answer questions. So it can be more like a dialogue instead of me just talking at the screen for the next 45 minutes or something. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead for that. And
I'll
kind of give some other instructions while you get your screen up. I was going to say you can also utilize the raise hand button, which is at the bottom of the participants area, if you actually want to ask a question versus putting it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. And then the other way to have like a full view of Carol while she's lecturing, there's a view button up in the upper right hand corner, and you can choose a speaker view or gallery view, and speaker view will give you Carol's window right next to her lecture, just as a quick little how-to.
I'm trying to minimize the bar. Hold on a second. Okay, that all sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So the title of this lecture is Frau Fiber Persists in Spite of It All. And it's given by me, Carol Francis Lung. I'm as mentioned, professor of the Department of Art in the Fashion Fiber Materials option at Cal State Los Angeles, and I'm the archivist of the Institute for Labor Generosity Workers in Uniforms and Frow Fiber's biographer. So I'm gonna start just by giving you a little bit of my personal background. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Home Economics that I got in 1988 from North Dakota State University. And after I finished school, I moved to New York City to be a fashion designer, and ended up trying to find jobs in kind of the depths of the start of offshoring and globalization. And so the field was quite competitive with senior designers, pattern makers, cutters, people that were in their 60s looking for entry-level positions. So that was kind of like my first taste of globalization and how it was impacting the industry. I ended up working for a bridal designer named Janelle Berthet. Her company isn't really around anymore. And I was the assistant designer, production manager, pattern maker, seamstress, toilet scrubber, sales rep. I did kind of everything for this company that sold about $1 million a year in like luxury bridal gowns. And then the other part of my life, I had like these two, like almost like like two splits. There was the designer side, and then there was the artist side that did things like make sculptures at Burning Man and go work for Burning Man and go to Mardi Gras and do these kind of performative things with clothing and textiles. And this is all pre-grad school. And then in 2004 through 2007, I did a BFA and then an MFA at the Art Institute of Chicago, and also studied at the Bauhaus University in Weimar, Germany. So that this image was taken while I was in Weimar. I created a collection called SL Mode, One Size Fits All. And it was me kind of processing my experience of living in Germany and being an outsider and experiencing kind of, what's the word I want to use? I want to say, just like being mocked and stared at all the time for the way that I looked. And so I just exaggerated it. And then it was at this time in 2006 that I met Frau Fiber, because I had opened this storefront. And so Frau Fiber is from a small town in the former Eastern Bloc called Apolda. It's in the state of Thüringen in Germany. And it was known for bells and knitwear. And Frau Fiber was one of the many knitwear workers at the time. And it was located behind the wall. And Frau Fiber and I, as it turns out, we had this like parallel lives. I like to joke, because I grew up in Orange County, California, that I grew up behind the orange curtain, where Frau grew, which is the Republican curtain, where Frau grew up behind the red curtain, which was the communist curtain. And we both worked in the garment industry, and both of our jobs were offshored. Hers was offshored after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Frau became what was known as part of the lost generation. So they were workers that, due to the fall of the wall, their jobs were lost, and they never really had the opportunity to get reemployed or re-educated. And democracy and like the free market economy kind of left them behind. So Frau worked for a company called Strick Schick, and Strick Schick is one of the last knitwear companies in Apolda. There used to be like dozens of companies, and when the wall fell, they all closed because the production went to China. But Strick Schick has managed to keep itself afloat, and one of the things they produce is what's called a Blau Peter. It's the mariner's sweater that's in this photograph. So Frau has some heroines, and some of you might know who these people are, but I'll just go through them briefly. They were all social activists who tried to make their time better for women and for workers primarily, and for the greater public. So Rosa Luxemburg, who was active in Germany, Mother Jones and Jane Addams, who were active in the United States with creating things like the settlement movement and the housing, and tried to provide like childcare and good food for people that were working in the turn of the century. Frau is also a big fan of Wonder Woman, and really aligns herself with Wonder Woman in a lot of ways. Just Frau is kind of a superhero through the uniforms that she wears and the context that she puts herself in. So you can see her, this image was actually taken at the Women's March in 2016, which seems so long ago right now. And she's waving the Mend America flag that was created after Trump was elected. So as mentioned, Frau Fiber's headquarters, the Institute for Labor, Generosity, Workers in Uniforms, which opened in 2013 and continues to this day. It actually has expanded in the last year. And we like to think about it as a working archive and experimental factory. And the archive is collections of objects that Frau has produced through her performances of labor in public space, to objects that have been collected and her own personal objects. And hopefully at some point, the ILGWU here in San Pedro will be open to the public to come and select items that one would be interested in looking at and having the opportunity to do that firsthand. And then the other part of the ILGWU, which we like to call north of the 110 freeway, so the one in San Pedro is south of the 110 freeway, is embedded into the Fashion Fiber and Materials program at Cal State LA, and it's where the experimental factory resides. So that's where Frau does any of her production that she needs to do and think about new ways of producing. So I'm just going to show you a couple images of the ILGWU and the incarnations it's taken and the locations. So this was the first public storefront that opened in 2013 on 3rd Street in Long Beach. And this was the first version 2 of Tailor Made that I'll show you more images of that later. And then this was the location at 322 Elm Avenue in downtown Long Beach. And then this is the location today, well, the door. And this is what it looks like in the inside. So this is where I'm giving this lecture from today. And it's at 401 South Mesa in San Pedro, which overlooks the port of Long Beach. And this is a new direction that Frau has taken an interest in the shipping supply chain and thinking about it in context to other trade routes that have happened historically. So the location we're in now, she's able to daily monitor the activities of the port. So one of the works I want to share with you is the Sewing Rebellion, which many of you might know about already. And the Sewing Rebellion has had many incarnations since its founding in 2007. One of the things that happened in January of 2020 was that Frow Fiber called for a rapid withdrawal of all Sewing Rebellion chapters. So something that had occurred is that the Sewing Rebellion went from being kind of a nomadic practice of Frau's where she would travel all over the country and give one-off rebellions to having chapters all over the country that were hosted by faux Fraus. And it required a lot of training of people and a lot of administration. And at the time the Sewing Rebellion was started, sewing was not like a thing in 2007. Knitting and crochet were things in 2007, but sewing was not. And there wasn't a lot of accessibility to sewing instruction. And it was kind of becoming a lost skill, we could say. And Frau felt in the January of 2020 that the mission for the rebellion to instigate people sewing and mending had been accomplished. And so she decided that the Sewing Rebellions, as they were known with the faux Fraus, could withdraw and call a victory for sewing. And then these are some portraits of former faux Fraus. And the faux Fraus were a group of volunteers that donated their time to, one, learn how to sew themselves. Some of them had some excellent skills where some of them were quite novices when they started. And oftentimes they started as attendees to Sewing Rebellions and then gained the skills and then wanted to share them with others. So someone that some of you know is Stephen Frost. Frau liked to call him the ultimate faux Frau. He still is a very energetic person, but he was a very energetic faux Frau. And after he was trained, he moved to Boulder, Colorado, and started a chapter at the Boulder Public Library that really just had like 50 participants at a rebellion, and then he trained and swore in like another 5 faux frows. So things really grew rapidly. And then I think they're in the midst of reorganizing and kind of like we all are, not doing any public events at the moment, but I'm sure will start again. And then this is Lucy in South Carolina in Asheville. And Lucy was the faux frau whose specialty was like metaphorical mending. She did the most beautiful mended sweaters. And that was her specialty. So her sewing rebellion was everything was done by hand. All she did was teach hand mending. And you can see the flag in the background that Frau carried earlier. And then this was Kathleen, faux frau Kathleen, who was a former nurse, and Kathleen was the sewing machine nurse. She could fix and get any old sewing machine back in working order, and that's all she did for the sewing rebellion was like repair machines. And that's why she also has a special Frau hat. You can't quite see it, but it looks like a nursing hat, and it had a red cross on it with a sewing machine. And then this is faux frau Andrea. And Andrea was one of the participants who, when she started coming to the sewing rebellion in LA, didn't know how to sew at all, and really gained some amazing skills and a deep passion for sewing. And you can kind of see that in her upcycled shirt. And then this is faux frau Kim. And Kim was a former fashion designer turned high school home economics teacher. And then recently her home ec job was just, or her line of teaching was just closed by the school, which is unfortunate. But she had a great knack for piecing things together and making really innovative upcycled clothing, as you can see from this image. And those are just a few of the faux frows who really dedicated a lot of time and energy under the flag of the Sewing Rebellion. So the Sewing Rebellion today is the educational arm of the Institute for Labor Generosity Workers in Uniforms. I see I have a spell problem in there. Anyway, and now what we're doing is we're collaborating with libraries, museums, galleries, and art centers in the development of tech packs, instructional videos, and spaces of production that challenge the participants to exchange their leisure time for production, which is similar to the old message. The one big difference is that there's no faux frows present, and Frau is also not present. So this is an example of a tech pack. And a tech pack is, it's a fashion term. It's how fast fashion communicates with manufacturers on how to make something. And this is the tech pack for the Motifs, Migrations, and Misappropriations campaign, which was created when there was a lot of news about things in Syria about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And so the tech pack also has embedded into it like content about a place, along with drawing attention to these systems that we're working in. So then this is the other part of the tech pack that kind of shows you how to deconstruct 3 t-shirts to make this coat, or 2 t-shirts, excuse me, to make this coat. And then there's an instructional video, which I'm gonna just go out of this. Please tell me if you can't see the video or if it's not. So along with the tech packs are created these instructional videos, and I'm just going to show you a little clip of this one. So Frau is producing the Syrian coat using fashion industry equipment. So this is an industrial serger. And basically, you could watch this video and work along with it and produce this project. So I'm just gonna kind of speed through here because I can. Hopefully it'll play. So here she is at a single needle straight stitch machine. And I believe she's doing the binding that goes around the coat. And then it just goes through the whole process until you get to the end. And usually Frau has something kind of snappy to say at the end.
Overlap in our top stitch.
She's showing the
is cut raw edges, which you can do with the jersey knitted fabric. The sample on my right was produced with a Juki straight stitch industrial machine and a Juki overlock machine, both using single needles. The overlock allows for a t-shirt-like finish on the inside where we top stitched everything similarly to the first example, leaving all of our edges raw. I hope you consider as you make this project the motifs of your garments and where they originate. I hope you consider the migration of people that cannot migrate, where the garments and the motifs of their culture and their identity can, and also maybe rethink how you misappropriate your funding on fast fashion and shop to last, not fast, if you have to shop at all.
So there's an instructional video. And then, so the tech packs and the instructional videos get situated in these kind of like pop-up production facilities. So this is actually at North Dakota State University in Fargo, North Dakota, in their fine arts gallery. And so this is kind of how we approach. This is more my side of things as the curator and the archivist. I was not really into gallery exhibitions. So the gallery was set up with these elements in the sewing machine and a pile of t-shirts. And then you can see on the wall here that there's a YouTube address. And so the idea is that the tech packs are there and the video is there, and people come in and do the projects without a Frau or a faux Frau being present and produce the work on their own. This happened to be a fashion class, so they had some skills. And there were some other folks that came in during the exhibition, like one at a time, that also had a little bit of sewing knowledge, and they would take the time to sit and do the coat. So here are the students doing the production, and then here's a couple samples of what they made and wearing them. And then what would happen is, as the coats were produced, they would get hung on the wall, and each participant could take a Sewing Rebellion patch home with them. And then at the end of the exhibition, they came and they collected what they made. So an ongoing work that Frau has had since 2011 is the commemoration of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was one of the biggest factory atrocities in the United States. I don't think it's overall. I think something else has surpassed it. I think the Bangladeshi, which wasn't in the United States, but the Bangladeshi garment factory collapse was like the largest garment factory atrocity. Anyway, so she started in 2011 this annual commemoration of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and she cut 146 shirtwaist blouses. And the shirtwaist blouse was the garment that was being produced in the factory for the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And it's kind of interesting because the blouse was actually a symbol of emancipation for women at the time. It was the first kind of ready to wear that you could buy that was affordable. And then of course, you had these young women, immigrant women primarily, who were producing these blouses in these really terrible working conditions that ultimately caused their death. And from that, the ILGWU, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, really was able to establish itself and start to fight for things like an 8-hour workday and breaks and ventilation and doors that weren't locked. So this is Frau producing at the ILGWU on Elm in Long Beach in, I think, 2014 or 15. And then the faux Fraus at the time really wanted to take on this production. It's something that Frau does every year on March 25th, which is the anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And so a group of the faux Fraus wanted to participate. And so we set up kind of this little mini factory in a space called Thank You for Coming in Atwater Village in Los Angeles. And we blocked out the windows with black paper, and people could come and watch. We did advertise it, but they had to stand at this yellow line and they weren't really allowed to come in. And we did a 12-hour shift, and we took 2 15-minute breaks. And everybody had their job. So it was done in the piecework style. So like one person just did collars, one person just did cuffs, one person did all the pleating. And we worked like that for 12 hours. This is kind of like what it looked like during a break. And you can see like the hash marks, Gladys's hash marks, that's how many times she did that production. So everybody had to put a hash mark up as they would finish what it was they were doing. And we produced about 38 blouses that day. And remember too, like all of these people are novice sewers. None of them have any professional experience whatsoever. And then this was the portrait that was taken at the end. Oh, there's Stephen Frost again at the end of the 12-hour shift. And you can tell everybody's looking really enthusiastic about what had occurred that day. And then this last year, it was the start of COVID. So Frau put this banner in the window, 109 years of outsourcing tragedy for profit. It's a banner that she carried the year before, where she actually went to the commemoration in New York City of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire and watched the ceremony and participated in it and held this banner. But she did the performance in isolation by herself for an 8-hour shift. She did text images to one friend in New York City who was kind of the witness for the performance. So this was at the start. And then this is towards the end of the day. And I think she was able to get 8 shirts completed in an 8-hour day. So this commemoration continues. There's still about, I think she's produced somewhere around 89 blouses. So there's still another 70 something or 60 something to go. And it's probably going to take her another, we've been at it 9 years, so maybe another 8 years till this work is completed. So a performance that was actually done in Portland is the High Performance Human Powered Sewing Factory. It was done as part of an exhibition called Gestures of Resistance, Craft, Performance, and Slowness. That was curated by Shannon Stratton and Judith Lehman. And this is a terrible image, but it's the only one I have. And so inspired by the Fluxus artists that also have terrible documentation, I still show it. Frau knocked off a Columbia sportswear jacket using plastic shopping bags that got fused together as like a fabric. And she worked with a local bicycle person to build the bicycle powered sewing machine 2.0. There was one other one that was made a 3.0 after this. And you can see Frau wearing the Columbia sportswear jacket and her shopping bag uniform. I think this performance was from like 2012, maybe. I'm not sure. Anyway, and she'd bicycle to a spot and then set up shop and try and get someone to provide power. So nothing could get produced without the support of the community providing power. And it's interesting to think about because she did a similar performance in Los Angeles and nothing really got made because people wouldn't participate. But in Portland, there was like a jacket made almost every day for the week that the performance happened. So it says something, I think, about people in Portland, that maybe they're willing to get on a bicycle and wear a goofy hat and participate a little bit more than people in LA. So there's a sunnier day in Portland than the other day was.
I think you're right. We just had a sign me up response in the chat from a ACDer that is like avid cyclist. Ow.
Yeah. Well, the bicycle powered sewing machine has been retired. I don't know. It became too trendy for Frau. People liked it too much. So she stopped doing it. And now she has like a hand crank sewing cart that she pushes around instead. So
here's another thing. It looks like Don, one of our community members, pedaled for Frau in Portland.
Oh, cool. It must have been, yeah, for this project. Yeah, that's great. It was super. I think she had a good time. So the next body of work I want to share with you is Frow Fiber versus the Machines. And this work was inspired by Frau kind of being over the DIY movement and the kind of nostalgia that people express through the do-it-yourself movement, and this notion that like you can make it all yourself. And it was that partnered with the folklore of John Henry. And John Henry was a black steel worker who at the time when the railroads were being laid, this one part of it was done by hand mostly, and then the steam engine came along, and the steam engine, John Henry like takes on the steam engine to try and beat it, and so that the jobs aren't lost, and he dies at the end, and the steam engine just keeps going, right? So it's also this idea about like machinery and how it's a tool that often causes loss of employment. Like you had that with the Luddites and the Jacquard loom. You had it with Singer and the sewing machine. Like there's always this resistance to machinery. And so Frau takes on a series of machines, and these are durational videos, which you can only see in an exhibition. And so this is a video still from Frow Fiber versus the Machine. And it's the Frow Fiber versus the Machine. It's a circular sock knitting machine, a tube sock knitting machine at Wigwam Sock Factory in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. So Frau sat and knitted that sock, the tube sock she's doing by hand with like triangle knitting needles for 4.5 hours. And it's a 4.5 hour long video. And at the end, Frau knitted that one sock and the machine made 99. Then she goes back to Apolda and visits the Strick Schick factory where the Blau Peter sweaters are being made. And this is on a Stoll knitting machine. And this time she actually uses the yarn that the machine is using. And she didn't sit for so long. She just sat for an hour. You kind of have to negotiate with the factories. what they're willing to put up with, and they were willing to put up with an hour. And in an hour, Frau knits like 1/4 of an inch of the length of the cuff of the sweater, and the machine knitted 25, excuse me. And then the final video was shot at Echo View Wool Mill in Weaverville, North Carolina, in front of their ring spinner, which is what makes yarn. And she's using a drop spindle to drop spin. So for this particular hour, Frau spun about 125 yards of wool, and the machine did 10,000. So I'm just going to leave you with those numbers. And it's all like, I think it's really impressive when people can like knit their own socks, that they have the luxury to knit their own socks and the time to knit their own socks. It's amazing. I'm sure they last a really long time, but not everybody has that. So the Frow Fiber versus the machine, the first video, the ring spinner, the sock video, was part of an exhibition at the Kohler Art Center that included these casted pattern pieces that, if used, would make the coveralls on the right. And the coveralls, Frau knocked off the coveralls that are worn on the foundry line at the Kohler factory, where they make tubs and other poured iron objects. And the coveralls are definitely a commemoration to that labor, because Frau she wove that denim that those coveralls are made out of. And then this is the other side of the installation, where you see the finished sock and the video. And then there's a cast iron model of the Wigwam sock factory that was covered with sock material. So it's like the texture of a sock. And then a casted sewing machine called Made in America. That is a knockoff casted machine of a super cheap Singer sewing machine from Walmart. And I think we're getting towards the end here. TaylorMade 3.0. TaylorMade was started in the studio that was on 3rd Street. And it came out of this idea that people kept asking Frau if she would do alterations for them. Like at Sewing Rebellions, people would come in and they'd be like, I don't want to do it. Will you do it for me? And she'd be like, no, no, no. And then one day she kind of got this idea that maybe she would be willing to do it under her terms. So she created this wheel of wages, and the wheel of wages represents kind of the top 8 countries that import fast fashion into the United States, and how much their hourly wages are, along with, she includes France, Germany, and the United States. So you can kind of see in this image, there's like India, which is 55 cents, Indonesia, which is $1.41, Jordan, which is $1.25, Mexico, $2.40, et cetera, et cetera. So people would bring their alterations in, they would spin the wheel of wages. Whatever it landed on was how much they paid per hour for the alteration to happen, or the mend to happen. So this is the rack with the customer's goods on them. So you can see Christina Valentine needed to have the arm and the side seam mended and 2 pairs of jeans hemmed, and she paid $1.25 because it took Frau about an hour to do those things. And this was in a gallery setting during an exhibition. And so Frau was really uncomfortable actually with this scenario, and since then has decided that she will never do this again. That the TaylorMade can occur like in the context of the ILGWU, but not in a gallery setting. So here's images of the garments that were mended again. You can kind of see that on the left-hand side, the pants were hemmed. And so there's the bottom part of the pants on the hanger. And then this was the list of people who participated and what they had done and how much they paid for it. And here's a happy customer. And then I like to end with this image with Frau and her gold, silver, and bronze sewing machines, which you can't see the color. You have to trust me. These are her global wage awards that she kind of like names countries who have increased their wages every year and publishes it in one of her newspapers or in one of the ILGWU newspaper. And I just like to say that that Frow Fiber continues to persist in spite of it all.
Great, we can unmute if you want to clap. There's no reason to. I see some clappers, some audience members that are excited. Thank you, Carol, so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I guess it was a little shorter than 45 minutes, but.
Hey, there's no rules, I think, at this point anymore. Like 60 minutes, 45 minutes. I think it leaves us some time for some questions from the audience, which I think seems as if might be more your speed too, like engaging with community.
Yes.
So you can locate, let me just give a quick again, some how-tos. If you go to the participant window, you'll see raise hand option, or if you go ahead and do that, I can call your name so that we kind of avoid talking over one another to get some questions in here. The other thing is I can see 2 pages, so you can also like raise your hand, more analog than in the digital manner. We can try it that way, or you can deposit some questions in the chat too. What are you curious about? Now's your time. You've got Carol here and willing, ready.
I'm happy to answer anything.
Okay,
here's for Frau.
Yeah, what's next?
That's top secret information. No. Well, what's on the chalkboard on the other side of this on the other side of the shelving unit is she wants to start having coffee and cake with people that are connected to the supply chain. But that can't really happen until she doesn't want to do it virtually. She wants to actually have like coffee and cake, and it might be like a podcast or a radio show, or it might just be documented through kind of images and audio recordings. We're not sure yet. So that's in the works. And then also this research about the port. And right now, Frau's learning how to maneuver a bicycle powered kayak, and that's all I'm going to say.
Great. I think Dawn, you just piqued Dawn's interest there, because I think Dawn does some body powered machinery out on the ocean there. At least that I know of the work.
There's a question about the connections to North Carolina. I think the first connection, happened through the Elsewhere Collective in Greensboro. I think they were the first people that brought Frau to North Carolina. And that was like in 2010. And then that kind of, being in North Carolina and starting to do the research about the state and the history of textile and apparel manufacturing in North Carolina led to other return trips. And also work that I didn't show, which was the work at Elsewhere, provided Frau with the opportunity to visit Cone Denim on numerous occasions and kind of build a relationship with them. So there was hopes to shoot a Frow Fiber versus the machine video at Cone Denim, but then they closed very unexpectedly in 2019. So
I don't know if you may not have seen further up in the chat window, one of the ACD alums or ACD current students, when you were showing, there was a Frow Fiber that worked out of Asheville. They happened to be that student's customer.
Oh.
So there was some connection to
That's
Al.
what she was a customer of mine in Asheville, North Carolina. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Was it Lucy? Yeah.
Ah, cool. Lucy's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Really sweet.
Yeah. Lucy did this.
I worked at a coffee shop.
Oh, okay. Lucy did this great. Lucy caned chairs. That was one of the things she became really skilled at. And she used t-shirt material once to do like an upcycle, like connecting the Sewing Rebellion to the chairs, which worked out really well.
Can you see your questions there? Or do you want me to help you navigate them?
I'm just trying to figure out where I'm at. North Carolina, curious how I approach the factories. So how the factories usually get approached is, well, in the case of Wigwam, they had a relationship with Kohler, and I made that work while I was in residency, while I was an arts and industry resident at Kohler. And so I had met the son who was running Wigwam, and he was totally into it. That's why I was able to do 4.5-hour shoot. Where the other places, I basically would just kind of like email them and be like, hi, da-da-da. I usually throw away my professor title when I'm trying to work with the factories, and I put things, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't like talk so much about the critique when I'm approaching the factories. So they tend to think that, I mean, it's also like great for them, you know? But yeah. How much of a role do you think the consumer should play in using their dollar as a form of activity? It feels a lot like brands urge consumers to play the part of the change maker when it comes to buying sustainable. No, it's not. And this is a really complicated question. So I think that there's like so much going on in my head right now. It's kind of like shooting out a lot of things in my brain. I'm trying to figure out how to say it. I think that the creation of sustainable, ethically made products is problematic because it's just making more product. We have enough product on the planet to probably like, how about if we just take a break from product? And there are companies and young designers that are addressing the overage. Like I was in a show in Norway a year ago last fall with a Norwegian born but living in Paris knitwear designer who only uses end pieces from production to make her knitwear line. There's also some young companies that are using like whatever they can find from the t-shirt supply chain and just using those materials. Like I think it's starting to be addressed in a way that isn't adding more stuff. It's using what's in the waste stream. We really have to solve the problem of the waste stream. Like the waste stream from the context of environmental waste that occurs from the apparel industry to the actual stuff, you know. When I was in Haiti in 2009, like just the piles of secondhand clothing that gets sent to countries like Haiti and countries in Africa that have inundated and destroyed their local garment production and shoe production is really unfortunate, because especially in places like Haiti where there's 90% unemployment, the employment of having your clothing made is kind of like would be a good thing, right? So a lot of tailors, which, and in Haiti, when you train to be a tailor, you're like classically trained in the French tradition of tailoring. Like you learn how to tailor. They end up just doing alterations of Pepe, which isn't going to afford them the same kind of livelihood as being able to make, you know, full garments for people. And I totally get that, like, buying sustainable and ethically isn't possible, you know, but part of that is, and I say this to my students all the time, they hear it from me constantly, it's like, just save your money and buy that one thing that's going to last you 10 years. Like, don't buy something every week, you know. I mean, I've had students count t-shirts for classes. I had one student that had over 700 t-shirts in their household. So go home and count your t-shirts. And then say, do I really need all these t-shirts? What can I do with these t-shirts? How can we transform them into something else? And there are companies that are making yarn and things like that, but it really has to be addressed. Mind you, I'm saying that, and I'm watching the Port of LA, which is making the most money it has made in its history right now. Like, there is so much coming into the ports right now. It's phenomenal. Like, there's 20 ships out there waiting to unload. Part of that is because there's COVID and there's like 7,000 employees that have gotten sick, and, you know, there's that as well. So they're not able to unload as quickly, but okay. Why doesn't Frau doesn't like art people. She doesn't really like art. She doesn't like galleries. She likes engaging with public in a public situation. So she lets me do, like, in the future, I'm the one that does all the curating of objects and things like that. But performances happen and will happen either through video or in public space. I think I kind of answered the next question too. Any internships coming soon? No. Frau does not believe in internships either. We can't afford to pay you. And since we can't afford to pay you, we kind of work by ourselves. Internships, especially in the art world, are super problematic. Demand, you get paid. Just get paid. Or, yeah, I don't know.
Yes, get paid.
Get paid. I mean, you have to, I'm like, we're not really into capitalism either, but you need to pay your rent. And it's really yucky when, you know, artists are making hundreds of thousands of dollars off the objects that you're creating. Like, it sucks. Time to end that master apprentice stuff.
Understood. Thank you.
What was the process of communicating to the prospective collaborators? Eli, who do you perceive as collaborators? Because Frau sees things very top down.
I guess I'm just like, I'm curious about like what a little bit more of the nitty gritty process was of like when you're like, okay, I have this alter ego, and like how you, I think you kind of touch on that in some of the other questions, but like, do you when you're approaching them, do you like, if you're emailing a factory or reaching out, is it like, hi, my name's Frau Fiber?
No,
Or do you...
I do all the outreach on behalf of Frau. So if you think about it, like also in terms of the kind of interactions that Wonder Woman would have as Diana, and then the kind of interactions that Wonder Woman has as Wonder Woman, right? So as Diana, and also the notion to the same thing, like we all know that Wonder Woman and Diana are the same person, right? But we're able to suspend our belief to see the mission be accomplished, let's say that. So oftentimes, like, well, for example, with this lecture, so Sarah reached out to Frau and I responded. So I read Frau's email and then I respond. And if it's something, if someone emails Frau to ask about a sewing question, then Frau responds. But any kind of like professional, like art activities, academic activities, I handle all of that. And it's been a slow evolution over time as we've, you know, continued to do this practice to determine like what's Frau's job and what's my job to get the work accomplished. Because there's certain things she likes to do that I don't like to do, and certain things I like to do that she likes to do. And it's all a performance.
Excellent.
Did that answer the question?
It did. I have like a bunch of other follow-up questions, I think, but I'll wait until we have a studio visit.
Okay. Someone asked, so the boxes behind me are the archives. So they're filled with archival material.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. It's just so interesting. I mean, and the language seems so intentional. So like when reading like Frau's bio, I was like, it's the language feels so precise and intentional. And I also, the other part of that question was like, when did that language become really important? Has it always been baked into Frau's identity, or
Yes.
was that like an outward thing where you're like, oh, I need to make this very clear after a certain point?
Yeah, language has always been really important to the practice. So my whole last year of grad school, all I did was write and produce like propaganda and publications around the early thoughts of this. Writing was something growing up that was always really hard for me. You know, like it wasn't a great, well, I grew up in California public education. I never learned grammar. Like we had friendship circles and learned how to be nice to each other when I was in school. We didn't like learn math or grammar. So I had to catch up, and I worked really hard to catch up. And when I went to grad school, like I really wanted to work on writing. So I worked with writers and like making, to me, I've been making for a really long time. And so I'm a pretty agile maker. And I do run the studio. Like the studio is run like a garment production facility. Like, there's not a whole lot of inventory hanging around. I mean, the archive, there's a lot of like ephemera, but there's not a whole lot of materials hanging around. The materials get sourced as they're needed. Although right now I'm super t-shirt heavy and super men's shirt heavy, and I have a collection of hankies I have to do something with. So like there is stuff sitting around, but not a whole lot.
Renee, you've got your hand up. When you go ahead and unmute, if you can figure that out, to ask your question.
Hello, Professor Lung.
Hi, Renee.
I think it's really fascinating how you implement a lot of critiques of the fast fashion industry, such as the cost for the garment workers or the assembly line. But I'm really fascinated with your approach to the machine on the bicycle. Can you explain the symbolism behind that? Because I can't figure out how that is also squeezed into your critique of the industry, fast fashion industry?
So the bike was really about taking production to the streets, and that was a way for me to do it. And the bike also, so like on a personal level, and I didn't realize this till after I made the first bicycle. So the first bicycle powered sewing machine was actually was used in New Orleans post Katrina. And New Orleans is a community I have a relationship with. And I took the bike down there while I was in grad school to like produce textile home goods for people. And I built that machine. It was a disaster. I had to strap my foot in, pedal backwards in order to get the machine to go forwards. And it was good fun though. It made for good art, but it was kind of a disastrous project. And also, I don't know why I didn't think of this. I had done a site visit in the wintertime when the weather is nice. And then I went down there to do the project for 2 weeks in May, and it was hot as hell. And everybody's indoors, so people weren't like out and about. So that kind of sucked. Anyway, so then the next incarnation of the bike was the one you saw in Portland. And it was really, the bike was so much about just having it be in the streets and having it be accessible to people. So that a conversation could be formed. And it evolved from the project in New Orleans to actually knocking off the Columbia Sportswear, which Columbia Sportswear presents itself as if it's made in the United States, and it is not. And then the next incarnation, which was a new version of the bike where I worked with a master machinist and engineering students from Cal State LA, functioned much better, but still wasn't street safe. And for that one, there's actually a video, I think, online called Made in LA, which is ironic because that's what the art show is called. And I could have shown that, but I didn't show it. But anyway, for that one, I knocked off American Apparel goods in front of American Apparel stores. So the bike allows me to traverse kind of wherever I want and be situated like in front of those places. But like I said, the performance in LA, where I actually set up shop in front of American Apparel's factory near Vernon, and I did the Grove Mall and got kicked out of there, and I did Hollywood Boulevard. Hollywood Boulevard was super fun, but no one would participate. And maybe it was a lot of tourists too. And yes, it is important. Oh, what's important about knocking off garments? Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. It kind of leads into that. So the knockoff garment, knocking off is a term that's used in the industry to take something that's higher end and make it really cheap and fast.
What do you want to watch on?
Huh?
Might just have someone that accidentally unmuted.
Oh, okay. Did I answer your question, Renee?
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much.
The cast iron Singer sewing machine, that was definitely a statement about how sewing machines are made with design obsolescence in them. They're garbage now, and they get thrown away so quickly, and they break so quickly, and they're just plastic, and they're just trash. They're manufacturing garbage, basically. And historically, machines are made out of cast iron. So I have basically the history of Singer sewing machines up at the production facility at Cal State LA. And the oldest one I have is from 1880 something. It still works. It's a hand crank. Frau uses it all the time. And the newest one I have is like from the 70s. Because after the 70s, that's when globalization kicks in, and that's when kind of the quality of goods really starts to decline. And things are made, that's when design obsolescence starts to come into play.
Any other questions from the audience?
What are some of the public art creations, textile art? Oh my God, I don't know.
It's a valuable answer to a question also. We don't, right?
I'm like, I don't even know what people are doing. Like, I'm so into my own little world that I don't really know what other people are doing. It's terrible, isn't it? Oh, that's too bad about your Viking, Dante.
I
guess
love the
Cerealia.
camaraderie. Oh,
I'm like curious from, it's Cerealia. Did I say it correctly? I'm curious to know what public art you'd like to see more of.
oh, we can't hear you. You're unmuted, but there might be an issue with your headphones, maybe.
Oh, is that better?
There we go. Yeah. Yep. Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I got that.
Okay.
I was curious, you were talking about sort of the public, or I mean, the obsolescence of sort of produced goods. And I guess something I'm curious about is when you sort of approach like a sort of public art display or something that's happening in a community setting, do you feel like there's a point where you sort of have to be innovative every time and really different in order to kind of get attention? Because there is so much sort of public art, I guess it's not, that's, I guess, in good ways open to pretty much anyone, but there's also that sort of expectation of like something really sensational, or I don't know, I guess.
I think like for me, I don't really consider my work public art. Like it exists in the public domain, but it's more along the lines of like social sculpture. And in the trajectory of socially engaged, I did a lot of reading about this when I was in grad school. So you had like relational aesthetics, which is really the work that's like done for the public, but in the context of a gallery. And then you have like social practice, which is very popular in Portland. I have a lot of problems with social practice as an art form. And then there's social sculpture, which was Joseph Beuys and is taught, I think, through a school in the UK. And Beuys's idea, to me, the way I interpreted it, is to make socialism into public art. So his projects are totally rooted in socialism. The tree planting project, like that's what the socialists, that's what was happening in the DDR, in the GDR, while the wall was up. Like, so that's kind of, and when I think about public art, I think about Richard Serra and kind of plop art, where somebody gets a big commission to plop some giant metal sculpture in a place where most people don't want it. And I hope, it is my intention that through the process of like social sculpture, I'm more considerate of the public. So one of the things, like when Frau is out in public, she does not actually engage with people. She sits really still and she waits for them. So she might be a small obstacle on a sidewalk, but she's not like, hey, come take my survey, you know, or she's not like trying to get people to do something they're not comfortable with. So that's why in like the performance that happened in LA, not very much was produced because there was no participation. And she just patiently waited for hours and hours and hours, and was a bit of a spectacle, I think, on the sidewalk, and people took pictures and things like that, but that's as far as they were willing to go.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, that's
You're welcome.
that approach.
Oh, 1969 Bernina, that's a good year.
I love the excitement around the kind of listing archiving of all the sewing machines that we all own
Yeah.
in the chat that are like within the good era. I have a FAF. I just don't know how old
Faps
it
are
is, what
good
year. Yeah,
too.
it's like a
Yeah.
heavy gunmetal gray
Yeah.
from,
Yeah.
from the airplane paint
Mm-hmm.
war era.
And you can still, as long as you can still fix those old machines. That's the thing too, is like the new plastic ones, if they break,
They break.
and you can't fix them.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, Carol?
This has been great.
Yeah, I think so too. I actually really am nerding out about all the listing of the sewing machines in the
Here's
chat.
another one.
Excellent.
Oh, thanks, Dawn.
Yeah. Well, I think we've done a good stint here. Maybe we can kind of wrap up and say goodbye. But Carol, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story of your work and being so generous with the Q&A section of the talk tonight. We'll look forward for your next trip to Portland post-COVID.
Oh, yay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you all for tuning in.
Yes, and for your class that's here, I'll just put something in the chat here real quick. We've got, if you're interested in graduate programs or you want to chat with me about the Applied Craft and Design program, my email's in there. Or to be honest, if you just want to chat about your creative future, I'm always game. I love studio visits with students that are not my own here in the program. So just a quick email to me. I'd love to connect in any way.
Well, and Sarah, didn't you agree to come in the towards the end of the semester and listen to the students do their pitches for Biodesign Challenge? So
yes, I did. I just didn't realize that these students that happen to be here are the ones that I will be talking to. Yes, so I'll actually see. Yeah, I'll see some of you later on in the term.
Yay!
I'll be excited to connect and see what you're up to.
Super.
All righty. Well,
all right.
To a later date. Thanks so much, Carol. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you next week, Professor.
Bye, Dante.